Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be making another argument for Hadith reliability, and this is my second video in this series. This is about the reliability of Islamic military historical records. Let's get started. So, here's the argument. As you know, in this series, I'm going to present the argument and then deal with its primary contention to the argument. Here's the argument. There are many things mentioned in our military historical records that simply would not have been made up for the purposes of propaganda. The examples of things like this are literally in the hundreds. If Muslims were making up their historical records, they would not have made up things like this. The criterion of dissimilarity or the criterion of embarrassment applies on countless things. So, even according to the criteria, Western historians and Orientalists claim to use these have to be authentic. The examples are so many and so widespread that they are actually a massive argument for the reliability of Islamic historical records. Now, before I go into examples of this, I'll just give a reference from a Western military historian, Russ Rogers, who actually wrote a biography of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in this regard. So, this is a Western historian, and he's talking about this point. Here's the reference. Within the context of starting from the sources largely accepted as genuine within the Islamic movement, I depart from the approaches outlined by Donner, this is Fred Donner for anyone interested, by accepting the received collections of Hadith literature, particularly regarding the military campaigns and operations. This naturally places my approach in contrast to the traditional critical approach, which sees much of the Hadith literature as late forgeries. The reason for my acceptance is both internal and based on the logistical analysis of the events. In this context, forgeries would not have been able to match anecdotal recollections of the realities of the logistics involved. So, this is a basic argument for the reliability of Islamic military historical records. Again, I just gave a reference from a Western historian in this regard, who is not an Orientalist but still is a Western historian. So, no one can claim there's an Islamic bias here to prove the reliability of Islamic historical records in this regard. Now, I will give just three examples of this type of argument. Uh, because there are dozens of examples, I don't want to make this video very long, so I'll just stick to three. If Islamic historical records were made up by Muslims to basically for propaganda, right? Hazrat Abbas radiallahu anhu, the uncle of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would have been turned into a believer from the very beginning, instead of him accepting Islam so late. Clearly, Abbasids, who were in power for so long, would not have made something like this up. And I can give examples about stuff that Umayyads and others would not have made up as well. Moreover, I'll mention something else that would not have been made up. Any evidence of Muslims complaining about Prophet Muhammad Wasallam's gentleness with Al-Abbas anhu would have been excised from the record. This would have been removed from the record. But the fact that things like this are present in the historical record and countless other things like this proves the reliability of Islamic historical records. Again, this is not just one, two examples. The examples like this are literally in the hundreds. And the third example is the ending of Qaswa Azab, and I'll get into that later and why that is a significant argument. So uh, here's the most common Orientalist argument against this. The argument that I presented. I'm quoting the Western historian Russ Rogers here for the same reason, so that no one can claim that I am misrepresenting the Orientalists in this regard. Here's a reference from Russ Rogers. Naturally, those who take the skeptical approach would state all of these instances are elements of the mythos that was developed to justify certain portions of Quranic verse. But basically, this is the main Orientalist argument that these stories were made up to basically justify portions of the Quran, that the Quran came earlier and later ahadiths were made up to deal with that. Here's the problem with this argument. There is nothing about Hazrat Abbas radiallahu anhu in the Quran. Why would Muslims have made this up? Why would Muslims have made these points up? And there are dozens and dozens of examples like this that have nothing uh, alluded to in the Quran. There is no link to the Quran there. Like just as in this case, there is nothing about Hazrat Abbas radiallahu anhu in the Quran. The examples are literally endless. This is the main Orientalist argument that these stories were made up to justify verses of the Quran, ayat of the Quran, But the ayat of the Quran mention nothing about most of these topics. So you can see that the Orientalist argument cannot even work in principle. That is how pathetic the Orientalist position is. That it does not take rocket science, it does not take much critical thinking. Just looking at these instances like the ones involved with the Abbas radiallahu anhu, you can see that this argument cannot even work in principle. Now I'll just give a further refutation in this regard and why the Orientalist position is utterly garbage. Regarding the ending of Ghazwa Ahzab, the Quran mentions that there was a miraculous wind and that kuffar fled and the Muslims won. This is all that is mentioned in the Quran in this regard. But the Hadith and Sirah give additional details. There was a Sahabi who had just converted to Islam. The kuffar did not know about his conversion, and the particular Sahabi Raziyallahu anhu, basically played a political trick on the Jews and the Arab pagans, and this was one of the one of the causes of kuffar abandoning the siege. Now, this does not mean that the miracle did not take place. It did take place, but this was also happened. This is what also happened as well. Now, I have a question for you. Why would the Muslims have made this story up instead of just claiming that it was only a miracle or that Muslims fought the kuffar and made them run away? If someone had made this story up, why would have Muslims preserved this as an authentic narration? And the biggest point to consider here is that none of this political trick is mentioned in the Quran. Again, think about the strength of this argument. This absolutely flushes the Orientalist contention down the toilet, and it's actually one of the biggest arguments for reliability of Hadith for this very reason. We know what the Orientalist response to this is. We know that cannot work even in principle, and then we have examples like ending of Ghazwa Azab that absolutely demolish the Orientalist argument. I hope you have enjoyed this video and I hope you have seen how powerful of an argument for reliability of Hadith this is. If you enjoyed my video, please like and share it and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.